The recording's in progress. Let me just now see if it's gone to my Facebook Live page, which it should have. Let's have a look. There we go. Looking good. If I press that on there, I can see people making comments. Mostly the rude, Peter, rude comments, because the people that I knock around with tend to be very sort of rude people, basically. But, they're very light-hearted.
Light-heartedly rude.
Yeah,
Okay,
but
that's
rude.
fine.
How are you, mate? You've had a busy day.
Yeah, yeah. Been here, there, and everywhere.
So we've known each other for a long time in various guises, have we not?
Indeed.
Rugby, you know,
Yeah.
playing rugby with the likes of Bobby Thomas, Derek Sutton, Jack Horner, Albert Williams, many, many years ago. I've been invited back on the 21st of February to have a game of rugby.
Really?
Yeah,
For the old Crocs.
yeah. 71 years of age, going on 17.
For older show.
Yeah, for Aldershot, yeah, yeah. Because
Good God,
I
you
was
get
the
to play.
captain of I was the captain of the vets team there for many years. But it
Yeah.
was it was when I was still on the drink, and we all used to meet up for a pre-match talk in the Towers bar, and we get a
Ah,
few
right.
we get a few liveners down.
We used to meet in the Nelson, in the
Yeah,
Nelly.
yeah. We get a
Um,
few liveners down us, and sometimes we wouldn't turn up for the game, that.
yeah. Yeah.
Oh.
We played against you in the front row with you and Scully.
Oh, yeah, yeah. God, that's going back a
Yeah.
while. I've still got a Chester Vets medal, a national medal, and I've got no idea how I've put myself in that position. But, it's one of those things that happened in the past. I came round in the morning medal and I thought, I wonder how that's happened. Anyway, enough of this. Well, at half time as well, where normal people have like an orange and stuff like that for a bit of energy. We used to have a bottle of sherry.
Oh,
Yeah. Oh,
horrible.
Peter, I look back, and from what I can remember, right, they were good times, mate, but they were dreadful times as well. Anyway, enough of this nonsense. Thank you very much for coming on this. Um, we've got, oh, Shaz. Hello, Shaz. Shaz is watching. She'll probably say something. But it's basically, I call this Getting Real with Dr. Joe. And it's about really asking people on who've got the same sort of thoughts and feelings as myself. And my feelings are really that the world's falling apart. It's disintegrating rapidly. All the systems are falling apart, probably on purpose. And I think it's people like ourselves who are sort of why you work in the background quite quietly. I don't, I'm up in the front with a big gob, but it's really about bringing in new thoughtful and creative actions that can basically turn the world right side up and basically make the world a better place, Peter, because there's people like ourselves we've got a bit of experience under our belts and we've maybe got some good ideas. We just need to try and find ways of putting them into fruition. So do you want to tell us a little bit about like who are you and where would you come from, number two? Sorry for calling you number two. It just came to me.
Um, yeah, I mean, I'm obviously from Wallasey, and probably if we start 40, 30 years ago, in terms of what we're talking about now, when I was doing design and build construction, and I found that I couldn't really find a proper tradesman unless the father had been one, because the government had all sorts of mad training schemes. And then I found out that educate meant to bring out from within. And I realized that we do the exact opposite. In fact, we force feed, as we were, our children with little bits of information, whether they like it or not. And in the process, well, hopefully teach them enough to get a job was the purpose, and crush all their talents. So as soon as I found that out, I started looking at things differently. I had young children myself and so on. And that got me going really, and it led over a long period of time to realize that in effect the only reason that we work for the man It's because the man has got a bank, and the man creates a representative of what is really our life force intelligence, in bits of paper
Yeah.
or bits of digits now, and they call it money. Um, but it's all in debt. So in other words, because they add interest to the debt and they don't lend the interest, then there's a diminishing supply that keeps us in lack, while they just sequestrate all the assets that we build. So in effect, we are the supply. I call it the living infrastructure. We are the living infrastructure with all the time and skills and knowledge and all the energy, and we create everything and we are the demand as well. So
Yeah.
we actually create everything that we need, and we do it for the man for bits of paper. So we're always in debt and lack. So I thought that's not really fair. And so that was the basis on which I started creating systems. Anyway, I don't want to go on forever as I might do.
No, it's perfectly great, mate. I mean, because we share the same sort of energy, frequency, and vibration, and we're on a very similar wavelength, really. Because it was in 1987, something happened to me. I've always been an emotionally sensitive type of person, a highly sensitive person. And I've always
You
seemed to
noticed that in
pick,
the front row, yeah?
yeah, I always seem to pick up stuff that people were unaware of, and I thought it was something wrong with me, but I found that if I drink heavily, right, it sort of calmed me down and I was able to fit back into this normality box to try and make money, to try and stay in the job, to try and pay the mortgage and the bills and and all that sort of thing. And then in 1987, I was sort of hit by an explosion of new information and it sent me off me trolley, basically, Peter. I was diagnosed at the time with paranoid schizophrenia, which sounds very nice, right? But I just didn't know what the hell was going on, mate. And in the end, I was trying to throw myself off bridges just to try and make some space in my mind, you know what I mean? And I was hospitalized, but it wasn't the first time I'd been hospitalized. It was the third time that I'd been put into a psychiatric department. Um, and as I say, they largactilized me, to try and keep me calm and almost to try and put me back into the box again, And I realize now that I was always out of the box trying to get in it, but that was probably the wrong way round, because I think more and more now with what's going on, and this is just how I explain things and what I feel. I think there's a massive, great big awakening happening, and there's a great big shift in people's consciousness, whether they like it or not, Peter. And it's almost like forcing people to look at their values and their ideas and their ideals. And most people are coming up with, hang on a second, how have I put myself? Or most people are saying, how have they put me in this position? I turn that round with people that I'm working with to say, no, no, they haven't done it to you without your permission at some level here. So how have you allowed that? How have you actually made the choice to stay in this position? And now that you're starting to see the light, for want of a better way of saying it, what are you going to do next? How are you going to turn this round, right? And sort of overcome this sort of fear-based actions that you're taking. Does that make sense?
It does, and there's two sides to that, in my view. And the first one is actually taking action and doing something positive, based on what you've learned, in this mad system. And the other one, which is like almost a corollary, if that's the right word, is to stop looking at things, i.e., causes, because we're always focused on the cause of everything. And sorry, not I'm looking at the other way around. Stop looking at the effects,
Yeah.
and look at the causes. And if you track the cause right the way back down, to the real cause, which you could call it God or you could call it consciousness or whatever, then you realize that actually the entrapment that we're in is a case of separation in bodies. So we're all separate, and that naturally leads to varying levels of narcissism because you've got to look after yourself.
Yeah.
And we can come back to that, but that actually brings me quite nicely to what we're doing in practical terms. And with a close friend and colleague for probably the last 10 years, we've developed a process called Co-op Lab.
Mm.
And Co-op Lab is a way of looking at how the living infrastructure of men, women, children, who are all the supply and demand, can actually cooperate, and by really identifying, pursuing, exchanging their skills, time, and knowledge. And if you think about anything that goes on in this living infrastructure, developing goods, services, projects, whatever, for the man, for the money, so we can pay taxes and be controlled, etc., then that process always involves exchanging time, skills, and knowledge. With obviously, any project from construction, I can tell you, is three things, which is labor, materials, and equipment,
Yeah.
and that's it. So, in other words, all of those things, the labor, which is us, and our life force intelligence, we create the goods and the equipment that allows things to be built and formed and so on. So what we looked at is, well, okay, if those people are allowed to find each other locally and exchange time and skills and knowledge, while learning and exchanging goods and services from each other, then they could produce endless projects and commercial activities, health activities, etc., and actually find the birds of a feather, which actually would solve a lot of mental health and other isolation problems because they could choose inclusion in the activities that make the heart sing. So, in other words, instead of being railroaded into an indoctrination system called education, that they could actually be working hands-on with each other and developing projects, and in that process, really producing their own local services instead of having some sort of government, local, regional, national. Local people could get together in what we call a co-op lab, and a co-op lab is really a private members association. So it's living people who get together and really they make one pledge in our system, and that is to cause no harm.
Yeah.
So in other words, they're not ripping each other off, and they're not, it doesn't get rid of anything, like criminality and police and things like that. But it means that when you're dealing with other people, at least you know that they've taken this pledge, and they can be called in, just like if you're playing rugby, and you stamp on someone's head and get sent off, then the committee call you in, and you might get banned for a month or whatever. So we can use the same process that we already works, really. So the idea is that we've created, or we're just about to launch, the Co-op Lab PMA software platform. And all it does is, in the first instance, you post what you're offering and what you need. And an AI, actually, private AI, matches them. So if you want someone to walk your dog, or to give you £5 of potatoes or whatever, then it matches. If someone says, well, if you walk my dog, I'll fit your kitchen, or I'll give you potatoes or whatever, or a massage, or I'll lay bricks for someone who's doing something that's good for children, etc., and on and on and on. And if you think about it, everything that we spend money on is what we need. So
Yeah.
if your needs are increasingly matched by other people's offers, then you can see that, whether it's your business, your person, your family, then or a project that you've got in mind, you can find all the people who can exchange time and skills and knowledge, and there can be money involved, obviously. So that's what we're about to launch. And then after that, we're going to add shops to it and all sorts of media and really the people who join it. Like locally, you have like like a rugby club would have a committee. Well, you have a co-op lab committee, and they're like people who maybe we call them community champions, someone who specializes in sport, arts, health, food, technology, construction, law, whatever. And then, so like basically, you've assembled the knowledge and the expertise locally, and obviously they know people in other areas, so they can start to exchange time and skills and knowledge and ideas. And really, what it's doing is it's uniting people, um, really around the common values to use the common sense. And finally, in the process, as they exchange time and skills and knowledge, they will, in the next, as we develop it over the next 6 months, let's say, it'll develop a local currency. So that can be used for additional liquidity for barter. Anyway, that's about it, really, what we're doing.
I just have to
Um,
say, Peter, you don't half go on.
I know that's what I used to say, but it's a bit boring
Thank
old fart.
thank goodness. Thank goodness,
Um,
because so do I when I get going, as anybody on here would tell you.
But with that story, you can't really stop in the middle unless someone says, "Shut up, you boring old bastard," which often happens actually.
Yeah,
Um,
happens to me for ages, and people are waving like that as if to say, "Come on, you've had your time." You know what I mean? But no, no, you know, wholeheartedly, I'm right behind what you're doing because I'm doing a similar thing myself. Mine's more inclined to plug in people and helping people to plug back into their basically innate intelligence, because I think there almost seems to be some sort of nefarious plot to keep us away from thinking for ourselves at a deeper level. You know, everything seems to be distracted away to external stuff, you know, and the lookout for somebody to help us. It's almost like a whole global victim situation, really, where people are sort of so insecure in themselves, you know, and they lack self-worth, but pretending they've got it, you know, with all the possessions they've got. I'm just speaking here as it's coming out, so that's generally the best way. So I think more and more people are realizing that. To use a phrase, because I don't like mimicry, but I do like a few phrases that if you don't go within, you'll go without. I like that one. I don't know who said that. If it was one of you, put your name on the list, then there's no problem. But you know, I understand now that my basic problem is that my vision was always looking outwards. It was always full of expectations and hopes, you know, and they never materialized, Peter. You know, I've got a fantastic imagination and I was full of principles. It's just that the imagination was working to defend me and the principles were back to front, you know. So by going inwards and be with a sort of a fellowship of people, I actually found a fellowship that I'd craved for a long time. And it was only by going in. Peter, and most amazing things happened to me. All sorts of synchronicities and coincidences started to happen to me. And I'll say it's Alcoholics Anonymous that I got a lot of this information from. And I still practice to the best of my ability the principles of AA. And it's basically about authenticity and rigorous honesty with yourself. And what I like about AA, Peter, is there's phrases like solitary self-appraisal seldom suffices. Well, I had to go and look up what that meant. But it means if you've got any good ideas, share them first with somebody you can trust, right? So they can open-heartedly discern whether it feels like, because they do say, you know, a recovering alcoholic with a good idea is a dangerous creature. You know, and I have a lot of so-called good ideas, and I go and talk them out either with my sponsor or a couple of other people that I trust, including you, mate, right? You know, and they'll either say, well, hang on a second, that's basically all about you, you know. So I have to watch out for that because it's almost like there's a little devil on my shoulder, right? Sort of trying to misdirect me with red herrings in the wrong direction. So I keep open to that. Anyway, I digress. So I'm all about well-being now and wholehearted. You know, I call it wholesome, wholehearted, whole person health. And that means there's different components to health. that medicine misses out on. So the stuff I'm bringing in is causing trouble in the medical community because they think it's a bit woo-woo. And one of the phrases I like is woo-woo works wonders for well-being on the Wirral where we live, you know. And what I'm trying to do, Peter, is scientificize this so-called woo-woo. And what's actually happening is there's loads and loads and loads of more evidence coming out with things like mindfulness, with things like biofeedback, with things like mindful movements, Tai Chi, Qigong, heart-centeredness, grounding, massage, all these things that have been considered to be more inclined towards beauty therapy and stuff like that are all coming in now. And Peter, I'm excited about it. I'm very enthusiastic about it. And that's why I've been talking to you recently about the construction of well-being villages in local communities because there's so much space going to waste. There's almost like community buildings there that are not being utilized for good purpose, and they're the sort of things I'm trying to do. I'm a member of the Wirral Community of Practice, which is about basically third sector organizations, mostly charitable organizations and stuff. But I'm seen as a community connector, and what I'm trying to do now is help people to, like you're saying, help people who've got expertise naturally and innate intelligence to get together to start communicating and understanding that it's connections and strong connections that's going to take this thing forward. So I'll shut up now, mate, and let you say something.
Well, yeah, in terms of a well-being village, we've got our first development. We've been looking at quite a few because, as well as doing what we're doing, myself and my colleague Matt, we sort of, as the Co-op Lab founders, we help community projects. So anyway, long story short, there's a community asset transfer on what is like a big sports barn on 6 acres of land, playing fields that the council, I won't say where, but it's on Merseyside. It's an asset transfer from the council. So basically, long story short, our bid is on the 18,000 square foot. It's a big portal frame barn, really, which is a sports hall. Half of it's going to be for a lady who runs a charity that looks after severely mentally really autistic young people and children. And that's going to be a big unit, which she just said soft play. They love soft play with hydrotherapy and other therapy rooms and and a refectory and so on, where the parents can come bring their children for respite, etc. The other half of that will be the 2 or 3 story office, workshop, conference space initially, because it's basically about what 45 meters by 25 meters. No, actually, it's 55 meters. And then outside there's 6 acres, so there's going to be 2 all-weather full-size sports pitches, rugby, football, whatever, with all the floodlights and everything. And then there's about an acre and a half with car parking and everything, and an acre and a half which will be opened up from the 2 or 3 story offices and workshops within the existing building. And there, as the people get together as a co-op lab.
Yeah.
So in other words, PMA's, Subsidiary Private Members Association for Sports and Arts and Health and Food and whatever else they want to do locally, then the village will be, imagine like a sort of village square with buildings around it. They could be done as containers. They can have shops in containers and offices, but I prefer a proper construction project where the construction guild. So basically, together they will develop and design and build their own village, where you can have I don't know, offices for the sports people, all the sports, with workshops, and then a conference centre, and that's to come. I mean, 2 all-weather pitches properly let can turn over and make a profit of a couple of 100,000 a year each. So the whole thing washes its face, and effectively it would be let the development would be developed by the people and let to through the guilds, the hub guilds, which is what they are, centers of excellence for each of the different sectors. And then they've got all of the expertise there to really, we call it an invest-worthy community. So then they can, raise investment, build their own projects, and really do what big corporations do or pay us to do for them. So that's really the well-being village idea, and I call it the first coffee shop in Starbucks. So once we've done it once, we're going to film it and make it available. All of the blueprints and everything are just going to be available to the network as it grows. And we've got international connections in Canada, America, South America, Australia, Malta, and Africa, and so on. So basically, we're going to give this software and this system away for people to develop, including the platform, to suit their own local needs and aspirations, and their own social mores. So in other words, if you think about it, there's a technology hub,
Yeah,
guild, and they're all interlinked. So why do we need Microsoft? Why do we need all these big companies? Why do we need Amazon when we've got our own version of eBay?
yeah.
So basically, we need to wake up and realize that we've been listening to the man for so long that we think he's clever. Well, he's not. He just relies on us to be stupid because no disrespect to anyone, but
No,
that's what
no.
the system, the indoctrination system and the legal system keeps us controlled within that box. Because obviously the reason why the banks can counterfeit money and all of these other, BlackRock and everything sequestrate all the assets we build is because they're allowed to by the legal system. So it's like a big umbrella of people who think they're clever because they think we're stupid. So it's about time we woke up and said, hang on a minute, we're not blaming you, but we're taking it back. Okay. I call it the great reclaim, actually. Um, anyway, that's sort of the practical things that we're trying to. And just one thing you said is about really, I call it oneness. We're
Yeah,
in isolation, but really, we're only in isolation because we've forgotten how to trust each other. There's no reason to half the time. And there's a lot of shit caused because of the depression, because of the fact that we have to try and escape from this monstrous system. And particularly because mostly we miss all the beauty
yeah.
and the goodness because we're looking in the wrong direction, and we're living in fear, in a carcinogenic, toxic situation created by the most deluded, narcissistic psychopaths you've ever had on the planet. So apart from that, everything's rosy.
Good heavens, that's almost rebellious, but I think that's the way forward in my view, as you know, because we talk long and hard about these things and how can we step at a time, breath at a time, day at a time, take positive actions, not thinking and theorizing about stuff because we know the theory. We already know what the score is. It's how do we take the actions now? And one of the things I like is Buckminster Fuller, who's one of my heroes. He said, right, first of all, if you don't want to fight, don't get into the boxing ring. And what he was saying is, don't be using your energy on fighting what's already here. Just turn the other cheek. I think that was said by somebody else. Turn the other cheek, look in a different direction, and get out of your head and into your heart and be guided by an open and flowing, compassionate heart. So, this is really about care and direction and navigation from a completely different point of the body. Peter, it's already happening. I study a lot of yoga. And this time was almost predicted thousands and thousands upon years ago. It's probably the worst time that humanity has ever had. It's the lowest point morally, disease-wise. More and more people. In 2018, we did talks, didn't we, at Edgehill University? It was called Shift Happens. Now, that was a few years ago, but progress is slow. But Peter, I don't know whether you felt it. Well, I know that you have, but it's starting to quicken very, very rapidly now. Now, people are becoming diseased and ill at ease with themselves because they're trying to hang on to what they've always done, when in actual fact, my understanding is they need to let go absolutely and trust this great big shift that's driving us now towards health, towards well-being. But Peter, it's all about forgetting, not rebadging old stuff that's gone on. I call that revolution, just revolving in the same old habits. I think we have to jettison that, let go of all old ideas, emotions, attitudes, those forming forces of our life beforehand. We need to almost turn our backs on those now and start working from our deepest skill sets, really. And I think that's I call this piece a collective individuality because I think we've almost, not through our stupidity, and I'm going to be a bit kinder, I think it's our naivety, right, has led us into this situation. But it's almost like we're being forced now to look up rather than looking down all the time. Look up and smell the coffee because you mentioned Starbucks. Over to you.
Okay, well, in a way, that brings me back in my sort of estimation of what you just said to causality. So, in the materialistic viewpoints that this body gives us, we got five senses, and obviously we look out, and it looks like infinity, and they tell us there's, you know, these telescopes and flying around in this massive galaxies and endless and absolutely fine, beautiful, but it doesn't mean a lot when you're sitting there on the planet in a state that you're talking about until you look at science, as they call it. Science just is really referring to knowledge, and all of our science for a long, many, probably thousands of years have been built, excuse me, based on really analysis and experimentation with the material world.
Yeah.
And now quantum physics has shown us that the material world, everything is just made of waves, really, and movements in space in the electromagnetic spectrum. And there's nothing actually solid. And actually, in our own bodies, there's as much space as there is in a solar system. So you start to think, hang on a minute, if we're studying bits of waves that appear solid to the senses, the five senses of the body, then maybe we're looking in the wrong place. Because if it's mostly space and the space is packed with energy, as Einstein said, everything's energy, right?
Yeah.
And we see seven colors out of a known spectrum of, one octave out of 100 and odd octaves. Then why aren't we looking at, if we were in the X-ray spectrum or the heat spectrum or the cosmic ray or the gamma ray or the microwave spectrum, what would be going on there? It's only that effectively, this body, this spacesuit, whatever you want to call it, it just gives us a perspective like one TV station in hundreds of TV stations. So I started to look at that, and then I realized that actually, when we look out, whether close up or out into infinity, what we're really looking at, not in a materialistic sense, but is endless possibilities.
Yeah.
So in other words, it's like a euphemism that infinity that is shown to us is like a clue. You have got, not as your little character,
Yeah.
you've got infinite possibilities. Well, why? How does that work? Well, what if the universe is one mind? We've called it God, but one divine, perfect mind, right? That contains every single possibility you could ever imagine. And then it's cause and effect. So obviously, once you create volume and duration, like space time,
Yeah.
because that's needed
Yeah.
so you can actually study it, then this one mind is actually exploring, investigating, and discovering what it is because it's got infinite possibilities. So how the hell is it going to find out what it is unless it actually plays all these characters and the scenery, the planets, the trees, the ants, the bacteria? So, these fools think that a supercomputer, an AI is clever. Well, hang on a minute. That's like a little tiny baby drop in the ocean of space. So, in other words, if we then really look into that, which is real spiritual investigation, then we're looking at causes, right? We're looking at what consciousness is. And eventually we come back to the planet and we see how beautiful it is. My youngest son's just had, and his wife have just had beautiful, absolutely wonderful 1 week old, identical twin daughters. And you just look at these perfect, it's just magnificent. And, there's bees and there's dogs and there's trees and there's mountains. Well, all of this stress that we're put under, we're missing all the beauty. Now, all that beauty cannot come from something that's vile. So the consciousness, the awareness, the conscious presence of that mind is obviously beautiful. In fact, it's awesome. And I'll shut up now, but I just want to say that if we start learning to live in awe and gratitude for that endless possibilities, forget the body. We're just that one mind, that one consciousness is playing all the characters. But just because you put on King Henry VIII costume, it doesn't mean to say you are him,
Yeah.
if you see what I mean. It's like the fellow went to the psychiatrist, like that, and he's got like a three-cornered hat on. And the psychiatrist, what can I do for you? He said, oh, you got to help. He said, what's up? He said, well, I think I'm Churchill, Winston Churchill. He said, that's more like Napoleon. I am Napoleon. It's that sort of thing that we've forgotten and we don't know who the hell we are. Anyway, that was just a little joke to cheer you up.
It brought a chuckle to my heart. And it
Well,
reminded me of when I was in the psychiatric department playing those characters, you know what I mean? No, but see, I believe that many people now are going through these almost like psychotic episodes on purpose because they're still trying to hang on to the old, and this phrase, until we let go absolutely. When I eventually let go through practicing various tools like mindful breathing, mindful movement and stuff, something started to drop off me, Peter. And I think that indwelling within all of us is that potential for universal consciousness. That's where I'm up to now. So it's not like that we have to learn anything. We have to unlearn and discard everything that we've been fed with, right?
yeah,
And it
yeah,
seems to be all part of a process. It's a bit like the Maslowian journey towards self-actualization. That's what that we have to go through these trials and tribulations to come to what Plato might have said is goodness, beauty, and truth. And I don't think that you get that intellectually. I think you get it by letting go and jettison the head and start to work with those beautiful things. Because we're lucky. I mean, we live by New Brighton, and I absolutely love there by Harrison Drive, where the Derby Pool used to be. That's one of my most favourite places because my soul just opens up, right? And it expands, and I start to see things, smell things, hear things, touch things in a completely expanded way. And I believe that's what it's all about, Peter, because you mentioned at the beginning I think that whole health is to be directly in line with our soul's purpose. And our soul is that deepest indwelling motivation, evolutionary force that's been knocking on our backs for years to say, excuse me, stop looking out there for answers. What you're looking for is in there, right?
yeah,
And I think that you have to get to a place almost like a rock bottom before a little glimmer of light comes in that says, maybe I'm not looking at this in the right way. And Peter, I unfortunately feel through my experience that people have to get to a real place of disturbance before they take on board other information. Because, in my view, the last thing that anybody wants to change is their own behavior. They prefer to control and change everybody else's to suit themselves. But I really don't feel that it works like that. And my idea for these health and well-being centres is that they'll be run on authenticity and truth and personal lived experience, not all this hypothesis and Higgs bosons flying all over the place. That's all very nice, that theory. But in the end it's got to be a program of action, not theorizing. Over to you, mate. I feel like I'm coming across as a sort of a lecturer here, but
no, it's totally pertinent. Yeah, I mean, I call it the conversation never had. And it's really, people are naturally, they call it cognitive dissonance as well. They're in denial because to reconnect to that infinite divine mind, even when it's quite a task actually. you imagine that our bodies with an ego mind that develops through the pressures of life from cradle to grave. So it's this separate little mind that thinks it needs to do all these things and is stuck in the material world. But when you get an inkling of what you're talking about, which is what's starting now, and there are millions of people looking at all different levels, and billions that are in cognitive dissonance at the moment. But the point is, once you know, and some people demonstrate, just like starting a well-being village where you can trust people and you're realizing your own potential and so on. Once you know you can reconnect, once you know you've got a phone, let's say the body's a communication system, and you learn you can plug it into the universe to all that beauty and knowledge. And you don't want to get it all at once because your head would explode, you know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah,
So if you relax, as you were saying, and let God be God, or let the divine mind unfold through you, because as near Sakadatta Maharaj, who I've studied for years, who was a fully enlightened sage in India, um, you know, as he says that you're being played.
yeah,
You
yeah,
think that you are an individual, um, but you're actually the only individual is this separated ego mind
yeah.
that is manipulated within your environment and society. But when you can push that aside, then you find yourself increasingly, you go through crises as you did in a big way. And because you got to get rid of all the shit, if you pardon the expression, and that's a lot of blockages. And you think you've just made it through, and then another load
Yeah,
hits you,
yeah.
and it's like a sport really, or a lot of things in life that you've got to go through stages. And learning the language is a great one because it's a pain in the arse, and all of a sudden you think you've got it, and then you realize more, and step by step. So in other words, the spiritual journey is very much mirrored in the journey in a body, but we get stuck in the body. So the real conversation is to relax, and apart from the awe and gratitude that you eventually realize is there, and obviously we need to teach each other and talk about it. This is the conversation, but we need to start laughing at the mess we got into
Oh, absolutely.
as these demented, isolated little bodies that think they're all separate, when actually it's that incredible mind, the consciousness that's playing all the parts. I mean, how amazing is that? And why wouldn't you want some of it, you know?
It's fascinating, mate. It's like Hippocrates. He said that life was toil and struggle. That was his thing. And he's supposed to be a healer, right? And he's telling everybody, this is what life's about. It's about turbulence. It's about energy, frequency, vibration, as Tesla said. It's about the ups and the downs. Because if you don't have the downs, you can't come up. Otherwise, it'd be just standard. There'd be no undulations. There'd be nothing, and you'd be bored, shiftless. You know what I mean? So I think
Absolutely.
it's the heroes on heroine's journey, isn't it? It's almost, Peter, like we sort of program the difficulties before we even get born. There's a in the sort of book that I follow, which are a set of principles. It said the root cause of all human problems. There we go. The root cause of all human problems is selfishness, self-centeredness. That we think is the root of all our problems, driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-pity. Right. We step on the toes of our fellows. That means we defend ourselves and hurt others. Right. And seemingly without provocation, we invariably find that we get hurt in the past. So that's karma to me, mate. And when I was going through all this, I was still at the head of a biomedical scientist. And I thought, oh, so I kept trying to apply these scientific principles, right? But they wouldn't work. And I met a group of people who said, you'll have to jettison all those just for the moment. Jettison those and start doing this breathing and start offloading all this stuff. And Peter, slowly but surely, and it's still going on, mate, like you've just said, you think you've made it and you scratch the surface and a whole load more stuff comes up. But I think that even that is sequential, mate. I think if you trust the whole process, I think you get guided. It's almost like your soul, right, attracts to you what you need to learn next about your own journey. and it might be exactly the opposite about what somebody else has got to do, but that's for them to do, and what you've got to do is what you've got to do, and this is why collective individuality to me means uncovering your gifts and your skills and your attributes, which might be the opposite of yours, but yours will be useful in a bigger context. So, like I've talked to you before, is my thing is about helping people understand that they've got an inner community that needs to communicate with one another. And a lot of people are looking outwards to community development. But I don't think that you can have informed community development until you're informed about your internal community. Over to
Mm.
you, mate, quick.
Yeah, well, I think what you're talking about there, in a way, is a process of true forgiveness. First of all, of yourself, and then to look at other people and realize that all of these slices of the pie, the circle can be sliced, or the globe can be sliced into endless slices. So each one of us is a character in that divine mind. But each of those characters with our individual soul, as you call it, a slice of the pie of the mind, that ready to reconnect, um, is worthy. We've all taken a really difficult challenge here, probably the most difficult, because we're really in hell on earth, because hell is a separation from the truth, right?
Yeah,
And that creates all the rest of the problems. So really, it's a case of, if you can see people in all sorts of different trauma and different problems and denial and whatever, and realize that you can only give out what you've got within. So if people are angry and bitter and whatever they are, right, they're actually unknown to themselves mostly.
yeah,
They're crying out for help. It's what you do and these other people do. So look, these people need real help. And it's like what, religion says, do unto others. I'm not suggesting that you go stroking the heads of nutters and violent criminals and so on. I'm saying that we can start locally by saying, this guy here, he's really, really lonely, but I bet he'd love to make a violin and learn to play it, or whatever. And when these guilds are there, then when I was a kid, I used to love making model airplanes and stuff, and then I found balsa wood and rice paper and that, and I got plans of this big galleon. Well, a galleon. I couldn't read the plans, and I was about 9. Now, if I could have found a granddad down the road who would have taught me how to interpret those plans, I would have been a boat builder,
yeah,
and then God knows what. And that's what I'm trying to say, is that it's a bit like what you referred to before. People inside are angry and separated, because they've got so much to give, so much to explore. And this is really what I call real education. And that's what we should be doing. And we should be doing it now, because we're sort of the last generation, and maybe a younger generation, that can remember what any sort of community was like. Because now these kids are texting each other even when they're out for a meal.
yeah.
It's mad, and the music is absolutely dreadful. It's moronic, and our kids' heroes are just fools, and they're not even particularly talented. So I think that people, like everyone who's got the nous, no matter how old they are, there's a lot of clever young people as well. Don't get me wrong. We need to start talking, and this is where hopefully when the co-op lab beta test comes out, which will be probably within the next 2 or 3 weeks, I'd like to give it to you and say, pass it on,
Of course, mate.
and
Of
just
course.
check it out. And then there's a system to go with it so that it's properly managed locally.
I mean, we've known each other for ages, and we're definitely linked in this sort of adventure, or venture. But what you were saying before is, I think if we can help people, because I'm a neuroscientist, whatever that means. So more and more people now are talking about co-regulation. So co-op lab and all that means is creating an environment where the nervous system of the individual can calm down for a while. Because miraculously, Peter, in that process, what actually happens is we drop into or we climb up to our intuition then. And I honestly believe that these nefarious organizations are trying to keep us in instinct and intellect. and they're not allowing us, or we're not, we're being conned into staying in that sort of 3D logic. But if we can just relax, a miracle happens where we can open up, relax, and it's almost like inspiration emerges. And you start thinking to yourself, hang on a second, something doesn't feel right here. Something smells fishy. That doesn't look right to me. And when you start getting those, that's the awakening, I think, really. And I think lots and lots of people, including myself, I'm still wiping the sleep out of my eyes, mate. But more and more, I'm starting to see the light as such. And that's what I've come to realize now. Even from a physiological point of view, we've been guided away from the naturalness of life, natural sunlight, the seasons of the year, chronobiology, all these things are coming to the fore now in medicine. And people are realizing now that we've almost like been duped into this, what do they call it, 24/7, 7 days a week mentality, right? Where we're switched on all the time. So, as you say, there's an isolation, communities dissolving. And I feel very positively like this yuga bit, which is like hell, is changing now. It's almost like we've got to clean our own act up. And this is a great purge. Like we have to go through purgatory until we get on the 12 steps to heaven and stuff like that.
Well, just on that, yeah, you triggered a few things there, but if we go back to the space that is packed with energy, and we are that energy in that mind, that the energy, the movement, the motion in space is thinking, is divine thinking, right?
Hmm.
So to have real love of life and to tune into that intuition, which is real education, tuition from within, because what's within is without. It's all space, right? Bits waving around in space, if you like, different levels of like holodecks, right? Then there's no death. So once we realize that this is a spacesuit that consciousness is experiencing, and we realize that you can't die because, if people say, oh, the brain's doing this and all that, well, okay, well, if your body was on the floor dead, well, it's all there. It's not working. What's missing? Obviously, the energy of that thinking of that mind is missing the life force, right? So, in other words, you can't die. It's just that's what you really are as the space, as the infinite mind, is keeping that body alive. That's how clever it is. It runs the immune system and the blood, and it knows all that stuff that our scientists, if they try and break it down, right? I always say, well, if you get a dog and cut it into a billion bits, you will never know that it's love, loyalty, and excitement. You'll never know that from them bits. So you're wasting your time cutting things up. You know what I mean? So, in other words, we're looking in the wrong place. So, and the other thing about this lack of fear and lack of death, if you're not afraid of death, no one can bully you, really. You know what I mean?
I agree.
Is that, and we know it from playing rugby, you cannot play a game without opposition. And this game that this divine mind is playing is the truth, the beauty and goodness. But it inevitably, it's not, it is the ultimate intelligence. So it knows that there will be entropy,
Yeah,
part of it, in the ones who get stuck in materialism. That becomes entropic. And you need that opposition to find out what you are. You can't find out what true beauty and goodness and heart and everything else is unless you can see the opposite. So we shouldn't be judging the opposite. We should be turning away from the black witch, giving it the opportunities to forgive itself. And if it doesn't, then to hell with it, literally.
I agree, mate. It's any energy. It survives off negative emotion. So
Hey, fear,
yeah,
yeah.
fear. But there's two obstructions. There's fear on the one hand and pride on the other. And pride says, I don't need to do this because I've got it sorted. You know what I mean? So to counter those is fearlessness. So we need to get courage from somewhere. That comes from the heart, lion heart and stuff. And the other thing is humility. And humility says, I'm not quite sure. And we can go back to the heart or the intuition and we can ask for an inspiration in quietness. And it goes, this is what I do is I say, I'm talking to my heart. I say, look, I'm not quite sure what to do in this situation. if you could possibly give us a clue, I'd appreciate it. So I'm talking to this higher intelligence, which is me. It's me anyway, but I'm talking to this deeper part of me because I'm admitting, first of all, I don't know what to do because I used to be a ducker and diver and dodging and weaving and blagging all the time, and it was exhausting. And I was always afraid that I was going to get found out. But Peter, to the best of my ability now, I'm as straightforward as possibly can be. And if I don't know something, I'll say I'm not quite sure of that. Right. And I wouldn't do that before because it was almost like admitting that I didn't know everything about everything in the world. And I know now that we're just scratching the bloody surface of what's going on here. And we have to be in a situation, in my view, to be in a position to allow for expansion and limitless possibilities. And that's what you said before is because they're just out there waiting for us to sort of resonate with them, if you like.
This is about the local network thing, is finding the people you resonate with who've got similar interests so you can exchange time and skills and knowledge. And really that's a process of bonding.
Yeah.
And that, I think that's the starting point where you can relax, and particularly as that creates a new economy. And I was going to say that the co-op lab is a process, right? And we call it a process into market space. So we've got marketplaces and all that. Forget that. The market is your life, and your life and you exist in space. So if those people are getting together to have fun together and find out things and explore and fly by the seat of the pants, why not? Because nobody knows how they got here and where they were before. So we're already flying by the seats of our pants. So let's have fun by
Yeah.
exploring. But as we exchange things and fulfill each other's offers and needs, right, then we're balancing our own ledger of life. In other words, we haven't got a ledger which is in the black or in the red to some nefarious banking system that treats us like slaves, like debt slaves, really.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're actually saying, no, we've done that, played that game, over. So all we've got to do now is get together and create a new game, and a game based on appreciation for the beauty, the truth, actually, the truth of the beauty and goodness, which is at the fundamental of everyone's heart. I mean, even a psychopath loves themselves.
Yeah.
So we've got so much to love, and we should recognize that in other people. And one more thing, which I don't, if you want to trust someone, right, then find a mum and dad who are doing what they're doing for the children.
Yeah.
And that's it. You can trust each other all the time if you're working together for your children.
Yeah. That's it, mate. And we're coming to time nearly. And Peter, I just want to say thanks, mate. Thanks for being my mate. Thanks for the talks that we have. And thanks very much. I'll be gladly, promote anything that's going forward. And if anybody wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Just email me at peter@tgl.com. TGL was the old platform, teaching, giving, learning.
Yeah.
So that's becoming market space, but peter@tgl.com. I'll be pleased to hear from anyone. And by the way, I reciprocate, and it's great to have you as a friend and a mentor and a colleague, and anything I can do to help. And I've already asked you to be a consultant to this well-being village development because you've got so much experience, knowledge, and heart. We'll be blowing up each other's bottoms soon with.
Yeah, yeah. Well, hang on, let me just feel my way. Yeah, I quite like the idea of that.
Well, I wish you hadn't said it because I
It-
know you. I know you've got an obsessive nature,
yeah,
and
yeah.
you're coming
It's
around
just
doing
like
that again.
it hasn't changed over 30 odd years. Didn't we used to do that when we were playing rugby? So
Don't be
yeah,
talking about the bath.
yeah. So what I'll do, mate, is I'll put your email with your permission onto the Facebook thing after this, and if anyone wants to get in touch with you, they'll just email you. That's great.
It's
And
been a pleasure.
yeah, let me just see if there's anything here. Yeah, no. Peter, just I know that you know this, but there's loads of movement going on behind the scenes now. There's definitely a tidal wave or a tsunami of love coming in, and I can feel it so strongly. And I feel enthusiastic and I feel hopeful, but it doesn't mean to say it's going to be easy. What did they say? It's simple, but it's not easy, you know.
Well, I always like to say, on top of that, we haven't started yet.
No, I feel that. And that's the sort of message to say, you know, watch out, we're coming, we're on the way, you know what I mean? All right,
Absolutely.
Peter. God bless you, mate. Thanks very much, and I'll speak to you soon.
Cheers, brother. Good night.
Thanks very much, everyone. Bye bye.